I think we can all agree that 2020 was a year. It's such a year that talking about most of the things that made the year what it is will get the video de-pushed off this platform. Because most of the main threads flag all sorts of algorithmic rhythms that won't favor the video. I don't want to bore you with what we've already been through anyway. We've lived it. And as much as it's nice to pretend that the start of the new year brings us the start of a new me, we're still in the middle of the events that started last year. The only thing I never thought of is how living in historic times can be so boring. I've seen some other historic events come and go in my time, though most of them never had a direct effect on my immediate surroundings though. At least I've always been the type to stay at home and do my own things, so from that perspective, at least it wasn't that bad. So, let's get into the things that I got into this year that I haven't done a video of its own. I had not touched Shovel Knight since the game originally came out until this past year, so all those extra campaigns, entirely new to me. Actually, I originally pirated this game when I barely had money and stayed at a place with no internet to pass the time in a disconnected world. As soon as I had both internet and money, I bought Shovel Knight on Steam and never touched it. I had my fun with it already, and I just wanted to support the developers. So I watched the expansions come and go as my copy of Shovel Knight transformed into a treasure trove edition. And with this year starting off the way that it did for me, with the channel being on hiatus and having not much better to do but to wait until certain situations were over, I decided to finally replay Shovel Knight and its expansions. Shovel Knight itself was still pretty good, but it was interesting to see how far indie games had come since it originally released. It's like going back to an early life NES title after you've gotten used to the NES games releasing near the end of its life. It's still really solid, but it's not as far above other games as it once used to be. Not a knock against Shovel Knight by any means. If anything, the rest of the indie scene catching up in production quality has been a good thing. And even when put alongside newer indie games, it's still a great game on its own. Plague Knight was a bit of a letdown, the same levels, but with a character using a moveset that doesn't feel like it was built for them. It cooled me off on playing the rest of the campaigns and I nearly stopped after clearing this playthrough. It wasn't bad by any means, but it could have been a lot better. And then Spectre of Torment was a lot better. A different format, new stages, and more meaningful changes to the gameplay. This is what I hoped that Plague of Shadows could be. It's great fun. King of Cards though, now that's the campaign I'd put at the top of the pile. I wasn't sure I was going to like the new mechanics in this one, and as much as I usually like card game minigames in my video games, this one didn't do it for me. But the main gameplay, the stage designs, the larger focus on side content, this was such a complete package with so much fun to be had that I ended up enjoying it a lot more than my original Shovel Knight campaign actually. I heard that if you missed the boat on Treasure Trove, you were expected to pay extra for the other campaigns. And if I had paid extra for Plague Knight, I would have felt burned by the experience, but King of Cards? I'd easily buy that one on its own without access to Shovel Knight itself. I liked it that much. So this was the year that I finally got to play games on the Sega Saturn. I knew that emulation for the Sega Saturn had been in a good spot for a while now. There's always been conflicting reports about it, but to this day I see people say there's no good PC Engine, PlayStation 1 or WonderSwan emulators. Systems have been running very accurately for a while now. So if some people can get the Sega Saturn running with no issues, then surely it's just people hanging on to information from ages ago when those beliefs were a lot more accurate. And yeah, once I got Saturn games running on Metnafen, there were no issues going forward. Saturn is one of the very few systems where I had zero experience going in, but I still had interest once I got access to the library. This is a statement that might sound weird, but I've got a good example for this. I wanted to get more into PSP games right until I got PPSSPP working well enough, and then I realized that most of the PSP games that I wanted to play back in the day had been ported to various systems afterwards. There's a similar feeling with the Vita when I finally got a PlayStation TV. This doesn't go for all games on those platforms, mind you, there's still stuff that I really like that's exclusive to those. But most of the big hitters that I wanted to play, I can play outside of those platforms. And I guess this is true with the Saturn as well, to an extent. A system largely known for shmups and arcade-style games obviously has most of its library also on arcade hardware, and a lot of that can be emulated with MAME or Final Burn Neo. But then you still have Panzer Dragoon Zwei and Saga, Shining Force 3 and the fan translations for the later episodes, or even the first real Vanillaware title, Princess Crown. It's still a platform with a ton to explore for me, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into this. I was not sure what to expect going into Katana Zero. I knew it was Hotline Miami-ish with frantic room-clearing assassin action and a messed-up narrative, but I didn't expect the narrative to hook me the way that it did, because Hotline Miami's narrative, while it's pretty cool, it never really got me that strongly. I didn't expect it to get as clever about tying its mechanics back into the narrative the way that the game does, so I ended up playing through the entire game in one sitting, thinking that I'd maybe played half an hour by the end of it when about 5 hours had passed. It's as good as a lot of people say it is, and I highly recommend it. Now here's probably the biggest surprise in this year's video. I have not played much of Spelunky 2, clocking only about 25 or so hours into it. It's not that I don't want to play Spelunky 2 or even dislike it, but on launch, the game had drastic patches rebalancing things almost every day, fixing bugs, changing how objects and rooms are generated, how hitboxes work. I kinda lost the desire to learn to play the game. The thing with learning a game for me is that it has to at least feel consistent to an extent, so I can feel out how things are supposed to go. When I can't do that because things keep changing pretty aggressively, then I don't want to continue learning it. And roguelikes and lights, to me, are about learning their systems. So I've put this one on the back burner for a year to see where things will settle when we get to it. I did enjoy my time with the game though, and quite like the higher difficulty that's been introduced. So maybe in next year's video, I actually have something in depth to say about it. The situation with Spelunky 2 left me with an unscratched rogue itch. And luckily, Shiren the Wanderer, the Tower of Fortune, and the Dice of Fate dropped a plus-sized back scratcher long enough to reach it, before unceremoniously teleporting me to a monster house after stepping on a weapon unequipping trap, leaving me under-equipped in front of monsters holding the initiative. I've been waiting for this game to launch ever since it got announced it was coming to PC, hearing great things about the Vita version. And yeah, this is probably the best mystery dungeon title in my opinion. The main story content might be a bit on the easy side, but all the side dungeons really help make up for it. Ultra Kill is absurdly good, and you should go play it. I only played a tiny bit of it because it's early access and I don't want to be burned out by the time the game is done, but what is there is already worth the money as is. I've also been playing a couple of shmups this year, and I've enjoyed them even though I'm not too great at the genre or anything. I hope to fill that gap in my general game appreciation knowledge base and at least get to play through R-Type, Darius, and the Donpachi entries. So let's talk about things beyond video games. I watched the first season of The X-Files this year. That might just be the strongest first season of any show I've ever seen. Usually the first season is when a show stumbles its way in the dark, hoping to find its footing and an audience to keep its lights on for long enough to figure out its own identity. But even the pilot episode of The X-Files feels like it's a fully formed show confidently moving ahead, knowing what it's doing. Main highlights for me were the episode mirroring The Thing, episode 8, Ice, with one of the production designers from The Thing being involved creating the set that it takes place in. And Beyond the Sea, where the role between skeptic and believer is flipped, with Scully wanting to believe in the supernatural things going on and Mulder thinking that it's a scam. Yeah, the first season already flipped the script that early. I'm looking forward to slowly making my way through the rest of the show because it's been very good so far. Having generally known about Takeshi Kitano's existence for years and never digging deeper into him, I finally watched a bunch of his movies. My first exposure to Kitano was the nonchalant and oddly charismatic asshole teacher in the movie Battle Royale that he played. I knew he did comedy stuff in Japan, but outside of a few things from 1999, I never really got the appeal of Owadai shows and general Japanese variety TV. I don't know any other way to describe Takeshi Kitano movies other than they're Takeshi Kitano movies. He has a unique sense of directing and with tons of things he likes doing and showing, with most of the stories often bordering on the nonsensical if you approach them from a literal perspective, and filled with hyper-violence that is treated very casually. Sonatine is maybe the best example of this. It's a movie he shot because he had 3 images in his mind and he wanted to have it in a film, creating the rest of the movie around these shots to lead to them. Most famously, the shot where he is pointing a gun at his own head and takes his own life. On paper, it's a movie that should not work, and in execution, it's an incredible work. With a bunch of yakuza laying low in a beach house in Okinawa and just generally fucking around for most of it. Boiling Point is an interesting work because there's 2 major reads on it depending on how you view the ending, which can both change the general meaning of the rest of the work along with what you think happened. Hanabi stayed on my mind the longest of them all because of how indescribable the movie is for a lot of reasons. It comes across as one of his most personal and contemplative movies, especially with that character who is left paralyzed after he's in an accident and starts getting into painting pieces of artwork as a way to stay active. Because being inactive led him to a depression deep enough where he started contemplating suicide. A few years prior, Kitano had been in a motorcycle accident, and this is when he picked up painting himself. The paintings that the character is making in the movie are Kitano's own paintings. They're not the kind of movies you'd expect from someone who writes, directs, and plays the leading role in almost all the movies he makes. They're fantastically self-indulgent, but they're also interesting to watch and think about after having seen them. They're art in a true sense, a conversation between him as a creator, as an artist, and his audience. I just very quickly want to recommend One Cut of the Dead, Tampopo, and Versus. For wildly different reasons, as they're all extremely different movies, and I want you to watch them as blind as you can for the best effect. Please trust me on this, they pay off especially well. So let's talk anime and manga. Mainly manga, but there's one anime here. If you asked me what Golden Kamuy was about a year ago, I'd have told you that it was a historical manga about a search for gold that featured a bear. If you ask me what Golden Kamuy is about now, I tell you it's the good, the bad, and the ugly taking place right after the Russo-Japanese War. The importance of preserving culture, life itself, and food culture, male body acceptance, the technological advancements of the early 1900s, and living for a greater cause than yourself. That's a lot of things, but Golden Kamuy is a dense work that is richly detailed with all sorts of historical and cultural details. Famous historical figures come and go. Minor details about cultural heritage and preservation get treated with care. Oh, and the fan translation by Everyday Heroes, if you ever look it up, is jam-packed with in-depth footnotes on every single thing that is referenced or shown. So you even get to learn some historical facts tangentially. Everyday Heroes also does the fan translations for Dungeon Meshi that I talked about last year, and their notes there actually taught me things about Final Fantasy X that I wasn't even aware of. Chainsaw Man came and went, wrapping up one of the most complete narratives that I've seen in manga form in a while, with just 97 chapters in Shonen Jump. It's one of those works where I've seen people say that they wish that it would slow down near the end and start world building or giving us more of a story, but I think those people might have missed the point of the work entirely. Chainsaw Man is one of those works that gives its story through subtext, even when it feels like nothing is happening in its surface level context. It's the story of someone clawing his way up a pyramid of needs before ascending and becoming able to take care of others. And the entire second half of that pyramid gets told almost entirely through a gigantic battle, with very little going on in the way of direct conversation. It's a masterpiece, and I'm glad that I read a couple of other things this year while waiting on chapters to release, because reading those other things helped play a big part in my understanding of how it operates and where it draws from. That's right, I finally read a bunch of Go Nagai manga. To be more specific, I read through Cutie Honey, Mazinger Z, Great Mazinger, UFO Robo Grandizer, and some Violence Jack. All of it ruled. The nice thing with a lot of Go Nagai manga is that it tends to be pretty short, so you can blaze through a lot of his works in an afternoon. And doing that is going to give you a much larger understanding and appreciation of anime and manga to this day. A lot of people know that Mazinger was the first of its kind, setting the bar for all super robot anime and manga after. A lot less commonly known is how the first time Mazinger Z is piloted, the main character loses control of the robot and has to watch in horror as it goes completely berserk, becoming a terrifying demon that can cause as much destruction and death as it could potentially protect people from. You know, like the first episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion. There's the joke that's not even a joke about how most of the really cool video games out there have always been Devilman all along. But the real cool work that I found interesting was Violence Jack. This larger-than-life figure ruling over the destroyed wastelands of Tokyo. There's some interesting visual things going on where even as you keep being exposed to the character that is Violence Jack himself, you still don't get a consistent perspective of him. His height, power, and influence is wildly inconsistent across pages, making him this living mythical figure that is larger than life, larger than fiction. And it's that work in particular that my mind kept going back to while reading Chainsaw Man. Also, I don't think I can ever unsee dog people or how that relates back to some of the visual things in Chainsaw Man. I've been going through Slayer since last year and it's been such a good time. Originally, I never made it past the first half of the first show, ages ago. I don't remember why it lost me because I really liked it. I was probably distracted by too many other shiny things somewhere along the way, but this time, I stuck with it. I still haven't watched all of Slayers, but I'm in far enough that I'm sure that I will reach that point in the future. I'm well past the halfway point. Maybe it's because I'm older now and something as aggressively 90s as Slayer resonates with me more now than it did back in the day. Maybe it's because I get the tabletop inspirations and comedy more directly now than I would have gotten it in the past. There's those old memes about how Record of the Lodos War is the D&D campaign that your DM played, and Slayers is the session that the players ended up turning it into. Slayers is a great time, and I'm likely buying those light novels when they get reprinted to see what's different in them. I also read through Jujutsu Kaisen and Black Clover. I felt like they had to be doing something right to be running as long as they were. My only exposure to Black Clover was the first few minutes of the first episode of the anime, and seeing people repeatedly dunk on it for cheap laughs. But Black Clover is surprisingly very good actually. I like how changes in group dynamics after characters have proven themselves is permanent. Things don't go back to a status quo immediately afterwards, it's good stuff. Jujutsu Kaisen is the most Togashi anyone has Togashi'd since whenever Togashi's last hiatus started. 2 years ago? Yeah, that sounds about right. Saikyo Densetsu Kurosawa is the rare Fukumoto manga that has nothing to do with gambling or mahjong. Instead, it's about a friendless middle-aged loser who wants to be strong and turn his life around. Maybe one of his best works alongside Ten and Kaiji's One Poker Hen arc. A manga world that gets 1 page per year is a manga that gets 1 page per year. It has 2 pages so far. Hopefully the coming year's page will be good too. Bard Loen is one of the few manga that genuinely gives me the feeling of reading fantasy literature. It's about an old knight who has retired and wants to ride out into the sunset as he looks back at all the things that he wanted to do but never did. Like how he wanted to dodge the political games of the nobles by retiring, but instead becomes part of it anyway. Big recommendation. Kinnikuman is as great as the amount of things it feels like it's parodying, until you realize that it predates all those things, like power levels. Vampire masks rising to power after a sibling rivalry goes wrong. King Crimson. It starts off as a weird tokusatsu parody with wrestling jokes until it becomes an actual wrestling shonen battle series, but when it makes that shift, it's for the best. 2020 was not a good year for me, and I'm sure it wasn't a great year for a lot of people. Personally, I moved twice and I'm not exactly happy where I am now either. The The isolation has gotten to me more than once. I've only hung out with friends twice this year. It's not that I'm paranoid about the virus or anything, but people in my street and that I've been in direct contact with have gotten it. At least 10 people in my immediate surrounding have had it. And they didn't all have it at the same time. They all got it one by one. So there's been a real chance that maybe I did get it, but I just don't have symptoms. So I'd rather not increase the exposure to those that I care about, especially when one of my friends still lives with his elderly parents who are definitely at risk. I'm still searching for a proper home. I have been for the last 6 years. Under a certain income level, you have to register as a house seeker to get a house with normal house seeking corporations. And after my old experiences with housing on the free market went the way that it did, I'd rather avoid doing that again. We're talking mouse infestation and tons of government inspections because things weren't done legally by the landlord. It was not good. Staying at that place ruined me financially, and I lost a lot of things thanks to that, including my health for a while. I lived with a friend for 2 years, and last year I ended up moving to a place that's only a little bit better than a homeless shelter. Though at least I got my own room and I had decent internet. But the people that I live with aren't the easiest to deal with, and the problems of a lot of people in similar homes in the vicinity all spill into the street often enough. It's rough, but it was kinda necessary since I couldn't register for help at the friend's address, kind of trapping myself there in the process. All while this pandemic thing is playing out in the background, further adding to the stress. Having good media as an escape helped me keep sane this year, and being able to share it with people meant a lot to me. And having a channel like this, where I could creatively work on stuff, is what kept me going once I got to the point that I was allowed to do projects again. So for me, I'm going into 2021 better than I went into 2020. So here is hoping that I can end 2021 in a better place than I went into it too. And I hope the same goes for everyone else watching this video. I hope you all have a good year. And the next video will be pretty soon. Anyway, this was AboveUp, and I will see ya.